Have you ever stood up from the couch and suddenly felt the room tilt sideways just for a second? Or reached for a glass of water in the middle of the afternoon and realized you couldn't remember the last time you actually drank anything that day? That moment right there, that little wobble, that forgotten glass, might be your body waving a flag at you. And here's the uncomfortable part. By the time you feel thirsty, you're often already behind. Today, I'm walking you through 5 signs that your body is running low on water. Some of them obvious, some of them so easy to miss that most people blame them on getting older, being tired, or just having an off day. Stick with me because sign number 4 is the one almost nobody connects to dehydration, and it's one of the most common complaints I hear about from people over 50. Hey there, welcome back to Golden Vitality. If you're new here, this is a place where we talk about practical, no-nonsense ways to feel stronger, sharper, and more comfortable in your body as you get older, without the hype and without the scare tactics. If that sounds like your kind of channel, stick around and maybe consider subscribing so you don't miss what's coming next. Now, let's get into it. Let's start with the one everyone assumes is the obvious sign: thirst. You'd think thirst would be a reliable early warning system, like a smoke detector that goes off the second there's a problem. Unfortunately, that's not quite how it works, especially as we get older. Your thirst mechanism is controlled by a part of the brain that responds to changes in your blood concentration, and that system tends to become less sensitive with age. Researchers have actually studied this. Older adults often don't feel thirsty, even when their bodies are measurably low on fluid, sometimes not until they've already lost a meaningful percentage of their body water. That's part of why dehydration is so common among older adults, not because people are neglecting themselves, but because the internal alarm bell that used to ring loud and clear now rings quieter or sometimes barely rings at all. So thirst is a sign, but it's a late sign, not an early one. Waiting until you feel thirsty is a bit like waiting until your car's low fuel light comes on to think about the gas tank. Technically, it's a warning, but you've already been running low for a while. If you do notice thirst, especially thirst that feels sudden or unusually strong, take it seriously and get some fluids in. But don't rely on it as your only signal, because your body has other ways of telling you first. Which brings us to sign number 2. And this one is probably the most visually obvious if you know what to look for: the color of your urine. I know, it's not the most glamorous topic for a Tuesday afternoon, but it is genuinely one of the most useful, low-effort ways to check in on your hydration status. When you're well hydrated, urine tends to be a pale yellow, something like light straw color. As your body starts running low on fluid, your kidneys respond by concentrating your urine to conserve water, and that shows up as a darker yellow, sometimes moving toward an amber or honey color. If you ever see it looking more like apple juice than lemonade, that's your body telling you it needs more fluid. Plain and simple. A quick honest caveat here: certain vitamins, particularly B vitamins, can turn urine bright yellow regardless of hydration, and some medications and foods can shift the color too. So this isn't a perfect science, but as a general daily habit, glancing at color is one of the simplest checks you can do, and it doesn't require an app, a gadget, or a subscription. Just pay attention. Now, let's talk about something that trips up a lot of people, especially those managing energy levels through their 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond. Sign number 3 is fatigue, that dragging, low battery feeling that makes even small tasks feel heavier than they should. Here's the connection most people don't make. Blood is largely made of water, and when you're dehydrated, your blood volume drops slightly and becomes thicker, which means your heart has to work harder to circulate it and deliver oxygen and nutrients to your muscles and your brain. Some research has shown that even mild dehydration, something in the range of 1 to 2% of body water loss, can measurably affect energy levels and how hard your heart and body feel like they're working during ordinary activity. Think about it like trying to water your garden through a hose that's only got half the water pressure it should have. The water still comes out, but slower. weaker, less effective at actually reaching what it needs to reach. That's a bit like what happens inside your body when you're running low on fluids. Your cells are still getting some of what they need, just not efficiently. And that inefficiency often shows up as tiredness, sluggish thinking, or that frustrating feeling of needing a nap by mid-afternoon, even though you slept fine the night before. Of course, fatigue has plenty of other causes too, from sleep quality to thyroid function to simply having a demanding week. So I'm not suggesting dehydration is the answer every single time you feel tired, but it's worth asking yourself honestly, how much water have I actually had today before assuming the tiredness is just age or stress? It's one of the easiest variables to test because all it costs you is a glass of water and a little patience to see if you feel different in 30 or 60 minutes. Now, here's the one I promised you at the beginning, sign number 4, and this is the one that catches people off guard the most. Headaches, and specifically a certain kind of dull, pressing headache that seems to come out of nowhere on an ordinary day. When your body's short on fluid, the tissue surrounding your brain can temporarily lose a small amount of volume, and that change is believed to trigger pain signals in some people. Similar to how a low tire doesn't just look different, it changes how the whole vehicle handles. Multiple studies looking at headache patients specifically have found that increasing water intake reduced both the frequency and the intensity of headaches in a meaningful portion of participants, particularly people who reported drinking relatively little water to begin with. What makes this sign tricky is that most people's first instinct is to reach for a painkiller, and that's completely understandable, but it's worth pausing for a moment to ask yourself when you last had a proper drink of water, especially if the headache showed up after a long morning of errands, a warm afternoon outside, or a day where you simply got busy and forgot to drink anything until dinner. I'm not saying every headache is dehydration. Plenty of headaches have other causes entirely, and if you're dealing with severe, sudden, or unusual headaches, that's absolutely something to bring to your doctor rather than something to self-diagnose. But for the common, nagging, dull headache that seems to have no obvious trigger, water is a simple, low-risk thing to try before reaching for anything else. Now, for sign number 5, and this is the one that matters most if you're over 60 or if you're watching this because you're caring for a parent or an older loved one: confusion, or what sometimes gets described as brain fog, trouble concentrating, or just seeming a little more forgetful or foggy than usual. This is a big one because in older adults, dehydration doesn't always show up the way it does in younger people. Instead of thirst or a headache, it can show up as mental fuzziness, irritability, or difficulty focusing on a conversation. In fact, healthcare providers who work with older patients are often trained to consider dehydration as one of the first things to rule out when an older adult suddenly seems more confused or off than usual, because the brain is remarkably sensitive to even small shifts in hydration and blood flow. This is worth sitting with for a second, because it's easy to write off a foggy afternoon as simply getting older or having an off day mentally. But if you or someone you love seems unusually confused, especially if it comes on somewhat suddenly, dehydration is worth checking for right alongside other possibilities. And to be clear, if confusion is severe, sudden, or paired with other symptoms like a fast heartbeat, a fever, fainting, or an inability to keep fluids down, that's not a moment for home remedies. That's a moment to call a doctor or seek medical care, because it could be something more serious than simple fluid loss. So let's step back for a second and put these 5 signs together. Thirst, which arrives later than you'd think; darker urine, a simple visual clue you can check daily without any extra effort; fatigue, that dragging, low-energy feeling that's easy to blame on everything except the glass of water sitting untouched on your counter; headaches, particularly the dull, no clear cause kind; and confusion or brain fog, especially important to watch for in older adults or aging parents, where it can be one of the earliest and most telling signs. Now, you might be wondering, okay, so how much water do I actually need? And I want to be honest with you here, rather than give you some rigid number that sounds impressive but doesn't actually apply to your life. The truth is, hydration needs vary quite a bit depending on your body size, your activity level, the climate you live in, and even things like whether you're taking certain medications, such as diuretics, which are common for managing blood pressure and can increase fluid loss. A commonly cited general guideline is somewhere around 11 to 15 cups of total fluid a day for most adults, and that includes fluid from food, not just what you drink from a glass. Foods like soups, fruits, and vegetables contribute a real amount of your daily fluid intake, which is one reason why people who eat a lot of watery produce, like cucumbers, oranges, or melon, sometimes need less from beverages alone than you'd expect. But rather than obsessing over a specific number, I'd encourage you to use some simpler, more practical checks instead. The urine color check we talked about earlier is one of the easiest daily habits you can build. Another good practice is simply drinking a glass of water at consistent points in your day, first thing in the morning, before or with each meal, and again in the afternoon, so you're not relying purely on memory or thirst to prompt you. This matters especially if you're someone who gets absorbed in projects, gardening, or work and genuinely forgets to drink for hours at a time, which is incredibly common and nothing to feel bad about. It just means building a small habit is more reliable than trusting willpower alone. If you're active, spend time outdoors, or live somewhere warm, your needs go up, sometimes significantly, and it's worth being a bit more deliberate about drinking before you feel thirsty rather than after. And if you're taking medications that affect fluid balance, or if you have a health condition like kidney disease or heart failure where fluid intake needs to be carefully managed, please talk to your doctor about what's right for you specifically, because in those situations, more water isn't automatically better, and your physician can give you guidance tailored to your particular situation. One more thing worth mentioning, because I think it gets overlooked: coffee and tea. For years, there was a persistent myth that caffeinated drinks don't count toward your fluid intake, or worse, that they actively dehydrate you. More recent research has actually walked that back quite a bit. For most people who drink coffee or tea regularly, these beverages still contribute meaningfully to hydration, even though caffeine does have a mild diuretic effect in some people. So if your day involves a couple of cups of coffee, you don't need to panic and think you're canceling out your hydration efforts. Just don't let coffee become your only source of fluids throughout the day, and try to balance it out with plain water as well. I also want to gently address something, because I know a lot of people watching this are thinking about a parent, a spouse, or an older friend rather than just themselves. If you're a caregiver, keep an eye out for these same 5 signs in someone else, especially the confusion and fatigue ones, because older adults are less likely to voice thirst or discomfort and more likely to simply seem a little different than usual. A helpful habit is keeping a glass or bottle of water visibly nearby rather than tucked away, since simply seeing it as a visual reminder can meaningfully increase how much someone drinks throughout the day, particularly for people who don't feel thirst strongly anymore. So here's what I want you to take from today. Dehydration doesn't usually show up as a dramatic, obvious event. It shows up quietly. As a headache, you blame on stress. A tired afternoon, you blame on a bad night's sleep. A moment of forgetfulness, you blame on getting older. Or urine that's a little darker than you noticed. None of these signs on their own means something is seriously wrong, but together, they're your body's way of asking for something as simple, as cheap, and as accessible as a glass of water. My challenge to you this week is simple. Pick one of these 5 signs, whether it's checking your urine color each morning, setting a habit of drinking a full glass of water before each meal, or simply paying closer attention to how you feel an hour after drinking more water on a day when you're dragging. Small, consistent habits like this tend to matter far more over months and years than any single dramatic change ever could. If this video helped you see hydration a little differently, or if it made you think of a parent or loved one you want to keep a closer eye on, I'd genuinely love to hear about it in the comments. Which of these 5 signs surprised you the most? And if you found this useful, hit that like button and consider subscribing to Golden Vitality, because we've got more videos coming that dig into exactly this kind of practical, everyday health information, the kind that actually makes a difference in how you feel day to day.
Thanks so much for watching. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.